Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question. He was basically saying, look, you're always saying full range of motion is best most of the time. If it's generally better, why do I see so many people bench pressing with an exaggerated arch, particularly women? I see a lot of women doing this. So what's going on there? If it's best, why are they doing that? So let me put on my +5 head of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's go into that. All right, just because people are doing something doesn't mean that something else isn't best or isn't ideal. All right, that's what people need to understand. Arching on the bench comes from competitive powerlifting. That is because arching on the bench lets you reduce the range of motion. So that's what you're noticing. You're like, well, if long range of motion is better overall for general buildup, why are they doing this? Well, if they don't compete in powerlifting, I really don't approve of them doing this. It's not necessarily beneficial because, again, like I said, this comes from competitive powerlifting. The whole point of a big arch on the bench is to bring your range of motion down. And more importantly, where is it taking the range of motion out? Out of the most difficult part of the lift, right? The most difficult part of the lift, and also the part of the lift that really recruits the chest fibers the most. So by arching, they're taking the hardest part of the exercise out. For some people, that might only be a 10-pound increase, but for some people, that could be a 50-pound increase on their max bench, or even their heavy work sets. You know, their 5-rep max might go up by 40 or 50 pounds. It really depends upon the individual person, their leverages, everything else. But yeah, because it takes the hardest part of the exercise out, it makes the exercise easier. It allows you to lift more weight. Furthermore, you're not just removing the most difficult part of the range of motion. It's easier to move any given weight. There's less energy involved in moving any weight, say 8 inches instead of 12 inches, right? I think most of us can understand that basic physics, the energy to move an object, force and things required to move an object. It's easier to move any given weight or object a shorter distance. It takes more work to move it further. So if you can cut a third of the range of motion out, you can cut a third of the energy out. Well, when you think about that from a rep work perspective, that really starts to add up when you're talking about reps. Because if you're coming in and doing like 3 sets of 10, that is a lot of inches and work being taken out on moderately heavy work there, isn't it? If you start trimming a third of the workout, if you were to do the same number of sets and reps with any given weight, you're almost taking out a whole full set, out of your 3 sets in terms of actual workload done. So yeah, distance moved is an important part of workload. So people who are doing this so they can lift more weight, it's done for a competitive advantage. But if you are trying to prevent injury and you're trying to build up general strength and general hypertrophy, cutting range of motion out isn't a good idea. In fact, people talk about the bench press being hard on shoulder joints. Well, that's generally because people bench really wide. Why do people bench really wide? Cuts the range of motion out. Cuts the range of motion down further. You don't have to work as hard. You don't have to recruit as many muscle fibers to move the weight for a full rep. All right, that allows you to lift more weight. Again, it's the same thing, but taking it out wider doesn't necessarily take it out of the bottom. It just cuts total range of motion. But the arch removes the hardest part while cutting range of motion. So generally speaking, I don't advise that people do this. I tell people that if you want to build up size and strength, you need to do a closed grip with either a very modest arch, because sometimes a little bit of arch gives you better tightness and it trains you to be more explosive, but not so much arch that you're taking out several inches of range of motion to where you're taking 4 or 5 inches of range of motion out. A little bit of arch can help with technique, or you should do it flat back, and flat back is also perfectly acceptable. So I'm of the opinion that for general chest, front delt, tricep buildup, that a fairly flat back or very, very modest arch on a closed grip bench press is the best way to do it because you're moving it through the furthest range of motion. Furthermore, it's easier on the joints. But when it comes to these things, what people need to note, we're talking about, again, the difference between building strength versus demonstrating strength. Someone who wants to be more well-rounded and have a wider variety of strength through further ranges of motion, different joint angle specificity, should be training these exercises in variations that utilize the longest range of motion possible. That's just the way things work. And what a lot of coaches have noted over the years, when it comes to specificity of training, because some people will say, well, but that specificity of training, maybe powerlifters should do it that way year round. It's going to transfer better to their main lift. Well, the thing that you note, though, is that people who train purely for specificity Just something I've had coaches note, a lot of coaches over the years. I've even seen, I think Greg Knuckles mentioned it in articles, that people who train purely for specificity for their strength sport without general buildup also tend to have higher injury rates. And the reason for that is that because they do so few different variations of exercises, they don't always build up all the support musculature in an ideal way. Whereas in someone who's more well-rounded and does a little bit of accessory work, does some different variations of their main lifts a little bit, tend to have fewer injuries because, again, they have general buildup and they're all around generally stronger. They also perform better when they need to do other endeavors and other feats of strength outside of just whatever their competitive stuff is. And not saying people shouldn't focus heavy on the basics, but you do need a little bit of variety, and it is good for general buildup of strength, general injury prevention. But furthermore, since it is easier on the shoulders, you do build more overall muscle, more overall strength potential using fuller ranges of motion. A lot of coaches out there have people do closed grip bench press and then start bringing their grip out. Again, I know Paul Carter's a big fan of the closed grip bench press for general buildup with his people. It is just an all-around fantastic way to build up general size and strength. Yeah, you can't use as much weight, but again, we come to the point of, are you trying to build size and strength in the gym, or are you trying to just demonstrate your strength? You need to save strength demonstrations for when they actually count. You're going to be better off, more well-rounded, more mobile, lower injury rates if you go ahead and train all these exercises through full ranges of motion and do a little bit of appropriate accessory work. You need to make sure that you don't have any real weak links in your overall strength curve. You do need to make sure that you're training every basic function of your body, at least the basics. You don't really want to only do 3 exercises. There can be benefits to doing that, but there's also can be downsides to doing that. But yeah, the longer range of motion, spend your off season, do your general buildup, all your base building off of longer range of motion variations of the exercises. And then when you go to the competitive environment, you can start adjusting it. And what I mean is, on the closed grip bench press or something, someone can start closed grip and flat back, and then when they start peaking for a meet, they can start increasing their arch. They can start every week bringing their grip out further. That way, then they are transferring. They're transferring all that previous training in general strength and size buildup over to a bigger bench press. All right, when they get to their actual competition technique, they can ingrain that technique and train to use that shorter range of motion, but without beating up their shoulder joints, without all these other problems. Furthermore, I would point out, because the closed grip does allow more use of the bottom of the range of motion, the part that builds the chest up the most, maybe they'll build a little more pectoral that way, which means when they do get to that big arch and that wider grip, they might have to move the weight even less distance because they put actual meat on their chest. And I do generally believe that the closed grip, because of that longer range of motion and the harder work at the bottom, particularly when you're not doing a big arch with it, I do believe it is a better pectoral builder. So yeah, in the long term, that will add up for that. It will help a lot. But it comes back to the point of, people will say, well, if this is the best way to do things, then why are people doing something else? Well, because they don't know it's the best way to do things. People oftentimes take cues from competitive endeavors and don't understand that general buildup is not the same as demonstrating strength in a competitive environment. And so because they see powerlifters arch and they see powerlifters have big bench presses, they will oftentimes just imitate that. They will try to imitate those things for their general training so that they can be seen as lifting a more impressive weight in the gym. And we see it all the time. It's ego lifting in a way, and we do see it all the time, because look how many guys you see in the gyms who do half squats. I mean, look how many guys even put it up on YouTube who do half squats. I mean, we've seen some pretty horrific examples there. I mean, Mike O'Hearn does nothing but half squats on camera. All right, nothing but half squats. Boston Lloyd, half squatting. So we see some guys even on YouTube who do this stuff. They just do partials and cut down range of motion so that they can look more impressive lifting oftentimes a heavier weight than they're actually capable of lifting. Is it ideal for building up? No, it's not. And people say, well, these guys do all this and they're still big and huge and everything else. Like, yeah, these are people who are on tons of drugs, though. And I'm not saying partials don't build muscle even for drug-free guys, but it's certainly not the best way to do it. It's certainly not the safest way to do it. It's certainly not the best way to strengthen all your joints. It's certainly not the best way to keep yourself mobile and keep your joints healthy and everything. It's not the best way to do that. It's not the best way to stay injury-free. And what I would ask people who are doing things drug-free, if you don't care about your health and lack of injuries and your overall fitness, why are you even bothering to stay natural then? Why are you even bothering if you don't care about those things? I would assume that anyone who makes a conscious choice to stay drug-free probably does so for health reasons. They probably want to be as healthy and as fit as possible, and they don't want to dabble in that area because they don't want to risk their health in any way. Well, their training should be approached the same way. If you're going to avoid drugs because you want to be healthy and fit and everything else, shouldn't your training take the same approach? Shouldn't you be training with your lifting in a way that's going to give you the most longevity, the most fitness, the lowest injury rates? I would think so. That would make sense to me. But you don't always see that now, do we? And a lot of it is because people don't always think about these things, or maybe they don't always know about these things. So that's oftentimes what's going on. There's a lot of cases of people doing monkey see, monkey do without understanding why they're doing a thing, or they're just getting caught up in habits and gym lore and things that have just become habit in the circles that they train in. Again, tradition and whatever passed on as bro lore without ever actually really thinking about what they're doing. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.